My guest on this week's episode of Suds Search is Zeph Snapp, CEO and founder at Altura Interactive. Zeph is a veteran digital marketer and an in-demand conference presenter. A few places you might have heard him speak include MozCon, Content Marketing World, and Pubcon. He's also an excellent writer. If you like this interview, check out Zeph's column at Search Engine Journal. Altura offers a really interesting service. They provide Spanish digital marketing to international brands. Usually these brands are growing from the United States into Latin America and need digital marketing expertise along the way. I can tell you from experience that it's hard enough to know SEO in one language. Zeph's agency has a bigger burden. They have to be good at SEO, which is interesting enough, but they also have to overcome communication challenges with stakeholders speaking different languages. They have to be mindful of a zillion little regional language nuances when creating and optimizing content. And there are SEO implications with each decision that they make. It's a fascinating topic, and Zeph is an entertaining and engaging guest to take us through it all. Grab something cold to drink and join me for a conversation with Zeph Snapp. We'll talk about how to avoid disaster when launching a website internationally. He'll explain the difference between translation and transcreation, and we'll spend a little time talking about MozCon shenanigans.
All right, Zeph Snapp, welcome to Suds Search. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. You know, I was prepping for this interview, and it seems like what's really interesting about you is that you have an SEO problem. Like, you have to do keyword research and link building and all the stuff that we have to do, but you also have this complicated business and interpersonal challenge. Like, how do you communicate and get buy-in and get a project moving along when there are a lot of stakeholders who maybe speak different languages? The SEO part of this is interesting enough, and I want to get to that, but I'm curious, you know, if you can give me some insight into how your projects work. So for starters, who are the brands you work with, and who are the individual stakeholders at those businesses?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot of our clients are under NDA, so I'm not allowed to talk about a lot of the stuff that we're doing currently. But I can tell you about a lot of stuff we've done in the past. So some of the brands that we worked with before are companies like Allstate, T-Mobile, Shopify, and a myriad of others, including some of the major streaming platforms. So if you're thinking about like stakeholders, it's so usually the difficulty is not so much that we don't all speak the same language, because usually English is the common characteristic. Okay. It's more that we have to bridge the gap. Well, we have to bridge a gap culturally, right, from Latin America to the United States and vice versa, but also an understanding of meaning and of context in another language. It's actually been my experience that most marketing managers who we work with come in knowing how little they know. And as a result, it makes our job a lot easier because we basically get to guide them along. Now, some companies actually have Spanish native people in these positions for marketing. And with them, it's actually even easier because we basically just, give direct access and move along.
Well, interesting. And, I wonder if I'm going to ask you one of those dreaded "it depends" questions here, but one of the things that I thought of was, like, it seems like businesses probably come to you at a specific moment in their business life cycle. So, like, maybe they're in expansion mode or they're in that conquest stage. Is that a fair assumption, or are businesses coming to you in all different stages? And I'm probably wrong on that.
It's a fair assumption depending on the size of the business, right? So, especially for larger companies, companies that are post money. Or even, post IPO, as you say, they're conquesting. They're going, what's the next barrier? What's the next thing that we can vanquish? And in those cases, it's we're looking at how can we adapt the things that have worked for them in English or in the United States to local markets or to Spanish speakers in the U.S. However, we do have some companies that are actually Spanish first. So, for example, we have a client who's a challenger bank, and their target is going to be only Spanish speakers. They're only going to go after Spanish speakers in the United States. And so in those cases, it's less about adapting what already exists and more about building something new. They both present unique challenges. They're both lots of fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let me indulge me a little bit more on this setup stuff. So if you're thinking about, I'm thinking about a Spanish-speaking audience. We have, even in we work with mostly small businesses, but even our small business clients need a Spanish version of their website in the U.S. So they'll have a need for a service like this. Then you have a project like maybe you're setting up a Spanish language site for all the people in Colombia, right? So like same brand, but in a whole country. It seems like those are very different projects. How do you approach those? Do you do both of those things? And how wildly different is that challenge?
Okay, so we start from the same place when we're thinking about this. What we found over the years is that the most important action item that we have on our plate when we begin an engagement is building a style guide. So to give you a little more info, like most of the projects that we work on deal with content in some way, whether it's the translation of content or creating new content for Spanish speakers, right? What we start with is a guiding document that we call a style guide. And what this does is we talk about forms of address, because in Spanish there's formal and there's informal, there's passive, there's active, and there's terminology too, right? Like you could say we prefer auto over coche, for example, in the case of like a lender or something like that, right? So it's about word choice, it's about context, it's about building a brief for that client. This is a living document. It exists both in English and in Spanish, so that our team updates it in real time and the client can see it in real time as well. And so this sort of becomes like the north star for our project. It doesn't really focus on KPIs, but more on the ideal customer and who we're talking to, who we want to be in that market. So for a project in Colombia, for example, well, we'd be thinking about Colombian pronouns and different forms of address in Colombia. We'd be thinking about individual context and word choice. And the same thing would happen if we were doing a project in the United States. A business that operates in the outskirts of Chicago is probably going to be mostly have customers that are of Mexican descent. And so they're going to be comfortable with Mexican Spanish. But if you're in New York, they might be Dominican or Puerto Rican. If you're in Miami, you might have more Colombian, El Salvador, Venezuela. And so you have to adapt the content to those contexts. You're never going to make everybody happy, right? But our goal is always to try and take care of as many of the potential users as possible.
So this is fascinating. So like you just kind of went over it, all these different colloquialisms that exist in different Spanish language parts. Like I can think of this as an American. It's like even in different states in this country, we'll call soda or pop something different, right? So it's totally. And I think now we're talking about Google, right? So we're talking about trying to rank web pages, or trying to get things better. So determining synonyms and user intent, Google's getting better at that. But I still feel like if you're using like vendor versus supplier correctly, that can give you a competitive advantage in Google. You kind of walk me through how you approach these colloquialisms and how you execute.
So I'm sorry. I know I was almost interrupting because I'm excited about answering the question. The first thing is that the idea that there is a neutral Spanish that is universal it's not possible, right? In the same way, the comparison I make, much like you did, for soda or pop, is thinking about the United States or thinking about English speakers in the world, right? There are times when I have friends who are British, and I talk to them, and they'll say a full sentence, and I'll understand maybe 20% of it, right? Because they're using words that are unique to them, and it's the same thing in Latin America, right? So. You have Mexican Spanish, you have Central American Spanish, and even there's going to be further definitions. Actually, one of the things I'll point you to is an infographic that we built. That's it's just forms of address, tú versus usted, how it's used in different places. But there's one aspect of it which is the keyword research and the intent, right? And then the other aspect of it is how does Google organize and rank these sites in Spanish? As opposed to how it would do it in English, right? So in English, it's gotten really, really good at understanding the intent of the query, right? Maybe we don't always like the results, but if you look for a car dealership near me, you're going to get that map pack, right? Bang. And it's going to show you all the dealerships that are near you, whether it's pay to play or organic, but you're going to see all of that there. Well, the issue is that in Spanish, you're dealing with 32 different countries, right? And almost as many variations of that. So Google, in many cases, is really good at parsing like localities, right? Especially like the near me kind of stuff. They're going to be much better at those sorts of queries. But anytime you get into things that are a little bit more universal, so for example, car parts, right? If you're trying to find a specific car part, you might have a lot of trouble because the sites that are ranking for you in the United States might be from Spain or Venezuela or Colombia. Going to be kind of tough to get, a muffler for a Honda CRV if that thing is, in another continent. So we see them parsing and improving their reviews, but there is actually a competitive advantage. It even now, 10 years later, it feels like the people who are in our space are like first movers, right? There's less competition. Yes, there's less search as well, but there's more room to play on the edges than what you get to do on a day-to-day basis.
I see. All right, so let me back up a little bit. So this seems like an unbelievable challenge, and I want to ask you about the style guides, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. But how do you hire anybody? Like you have to have people who could work with all these different cultural nuances and everything like that. So they need to know SEO, which is hard enough. There isn't a huge population of people who know SEO well enough, but then they also need to know language and how to adapt these challenges. So like Colombia is different than Mexico is different than Chile or something like that. Tell me about your team and how you have approached building out the team who can handle these sort of language challenges as well as the SEO challenges.
Well, so the first part, and you said it, is language, right? So we mostly hire people who it's their first or second job. And we've done this basically the whole time that we've been in business. And this is because, well, first of all, years ago, it was much more difficult to find people who had any knowledge of SEO. So we found that it was easier to train people. And I think that's still the case today in the sense that the opportunity cost is much higher on getting someone who knows or think they know everything about SEO, right? And when we hire people who are younger, then we get to teach them our way of doing things, which is very, very focused on basically creating the best content assets for our clients that we can. We feel that if we build incredible content, then people will link to it, and the evidence has borne that out. So our focus is we're looking for people who are really good writers and who can organize their thoughts. Right? The most important thing is not necessarily the vocabulary, but it's like, can they express themselves in an organized fashion that allows you to understand what they're trying to say? And if they can express themselves that way, then we feel like we can teach them the other parts of it. Now, language skills are important. Every member of our staff is bilingual, but not everybody arrives that way. Right? So some people come in and they're like, well, I have, the funniest thing on a resume is when you see, English, 75%. You're like, what does that mean? Okay. Right. But we have a really robust training program around language skills as well, so that anybody who comes in is going to have the opportunity to work on accounts. And when they're not working on accounts, they have the opportunity to skill up and scale up. And so the joke I've been making recently is that we are a marketing training organization that also services clients.
I love this. Yeah, it's very, very interesting, your approach. I'm glad I asked that. So I want to go back. I'm intrigued by this idea of style guides. It's something I hear all the time in design shops, right? Like they always need a style guide to do
That's where I stole it.
Okay, perfect. And so it seems to me like the message is prepare, slow down, don't rush. If you rush these onboarding procedures, the style guide, and the communication in the very early days, you could set yourself up for disaster. I'm the sort of person who I learned from I learned that the stove is hot by putting my hand on it a little bit. What have you learned from projects that have gone wrong to teach you about this?
Well, so you called it out right away, right? It's not bringing someone in soon enough. There are clients who bring us in before they have a Spanish language website, and these are my favorites, right? When they bring us in beforehand, even if we're not going to get paid by them right away, which is fine, what we're trying to do is we're trying to set them up for success, make sure that their website structure is solid, make sure that they've taken care of all of the queries that are in hand, make sure that the translations are actually of a high quality, because a lot of people will just go on Upwork and hire somebody, won't have anybody edit it, or they'll say, well, the girl at the counter speaks Spanish, she can do it, right? Instead of having markers come in, because when you're translating, you're trying to build like persuasive copy, right? It's copywriting as well, So I think that's like the biggest mistake is not bringing someone in soon enough for keyword research, for planning, and for the rest. The other one would be depending on automatic or machine translations, which is something that we still see quite a bit. Yep. Especially with car dealers, actually, where they're like, you know what, we need some marketing, we need some social media, but the translations are done. We put in the Chrome extension, and we're good to go. And there's the other part of that conversation, which is, no.
I bet I can totally understand this. So the other thing, you made a distinction, and I looked at some of your conference presentations. You want to make a distinction between translator and transcreation, if I have that framed right. I think this is fascinating. Kind of walk our audience through what's the distinction between those two things.
So, I mean, the first thing is that it's a positioning thing, right? And that's helpful because what we're doing is we're trying to distinguish, and it is because we're trying to lead people down the path towards copywriting. A translation, the way I understand it, is usually a 1-to-1, right? So red is rojo, right? There's less context around it. There's less understanding around, what it's going to be in the place where you're going rather than where you came from. And so with Transcreation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the spirit of the thing. So, if you're talking, for example, about a lending platform, in the United States, APY is very easy to understand. People understand most of the terms of engagement for these things. But because a lot of these, financial products are new in Latin America, they require more explanation. They require more context. They require holding people by the hand so that they understand what they're getting involved in, or just so that they understand the product itself. So that's why we also, you'll find that our landing pages are probably going to be longer than they would be in English, right? Because we're trying to provide as much information around the product as necessary so that people can really understand it. Because that at the end of the day, I think that's something that we all have to keep sight of is we're trying to be helpful, right? Like that's like the main goal is we're trying to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, I love this. So I have a couple of other things that I want to ask you about. We've kind of talked about big picture, high level stuff, but I want to ask you some just real down to earth, tactical, actionable questions. So we still need to move the needle with search engines, right? We can't just write and ponder all day. I'm wondering, something like link building seems like you could have a totally different approach than I do. Like if I'm trying to do link building for a car dealer here in the States, I'm going to use certain tactics that might not apply to you. Do you think about link building in the same way that you would imagine somebody in the United States would, or is it a different approach?
Well, I haven't gotten to say this yet, so I'm going to go ahead and. It depends, Mark.
Thank you. Right.
No, look. So there are parts of it that are the same, right? Especially when you're talking about linkable assets. In fact, I think that there's even more of an opportunity in Spanish because so in English you put out a content piece, right? You're like, oh man, we're going to build the ultimate guide to buying a car in Tucson, right? Here are all the things you have to have in mind. Here are all the laws. Here's what you need in order to have a license. Here's the payments you need to make in order to renew your title of your car, et cetera, like all the things that you need to do. And you're going to put that out. And sometimes you'll put it out and it'll just be crickets. Why? Because Tucson has one, but so does Scottsdale, so does Phoenix, so does, right? Like all of this content already exists and people are just fighting for space in the SERP. In Spanish, what we found is that there's less data in general. There's less information that is on the web. And governments and educational environments treat the internet differently. So, for example, a .gov link is a lovely thing, right? As SEOs, we get excited about that. Well, here there's when a city government leaves government, sometimes they'll just leave their site abandoned, right? They're just like, okay, we're done here, we're out, bye. Wow. So there are opportunities for expired domains there, or purchasing those domains and redirecting them. But also, you're not going to be super successful with your outreach, right? You're going to send something to there might be nobody listening, right? Because they're just not even paying attention to that site anymore.
Radio nowhere, right? Yeah.
Right. So what we found is that executing the blocking and tackling of great content and then promoting it via paid and quite frankly, a lot of times via like paid Facebook advertising and targeting journalists, targeting influencers in the space has been a tactic that has been really successful for us. As far as like conventional blocking and tackling, link building, yes, we absolutely do that, right? And you have to, but there's the other part is outreach is more involved. I've seen some of the most successful outreach templates from companies in the States and in England, and it's like 3 lines, right? It's like, hey mate, check out this thing I made, like, and that's it. Whereas in Mexico, you're like, hello, kind sir, allow me to introduce myself. I am the representative of this thing. We have built this thing. We would love, like it's a whole process to get people involved. So yeah, those are some of the differences in link building.
I love it. One other tag that you mentioned, copywriting and the need to create a lot of content. I just am sitting here thinking, and I'm going, oh, you guys must hate like idioms and cliches, because the cliche could be totally different in this part of Latin America versus this part of Latin America. Are you using those sorts of cliche type language, idioms, common conventions of language here in the United States sparingly for a reason?
Depends on the targeting, right? So mostly, I'd say about 80% of our projects are B2B, right? Okay. Which makes this easier, because then we don't have to worry as much about the idioms. We're talking to people who are already interested in a solution, that has some context.
Right.
But it is something that we absolutely keep an eye on, and it's something that we get edited. So currently, all of our writers are in-house. Everyone works for Altura, and they're all in Mexico. But as you say, if we get a project for Colombia or for Argentina or for Chile, or if one of our projects has elements in one of these countries, then we've also built a web of freelancers and people who we can depend on, so we can send them something and be like, hey, take a look at this document, make your contextual changes, give us your feedback. And sometimes it'll just be like, yep, that's all great. And sometimes it'll be like, yeah, this thing you said doesn't work. Right?
That's not what they say. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Right. But I think the most important thing here, just like in anything we do, is process, right? If we cover all our bases and we do all the reviews that are necessary, and we've done our research and we have our sources and we've cited everything, then at the end of the day, the deliverable is going to be all right. You can't half-ass it, right? You got a whole asset.
No, I love it. I was just thinking about this. Like, if I know what blocking and tackling is, I'm here in the United States. If you try and talk about blocking and tackling in Latin America, they might not know what blocking and tackling is. So
it's funny.
It came to my mind.
I use that on occasion with my team, and mostly I get blank stares. But at this point, most of them know what I'm talking about.
Got it. So, all right. So this is everyone's favorite part of the show. This is where Greg Gifford gives me a couple of questions with no context. So it's usually like 2 or 3 words, and I know nothing more than you. So it's kind of a high wire act for both of us, if you understand. So
awesome. I'm into it.
For Zeph Snapp, he has MozCon pre-party. Does this ring a bell to you at all?
Absolutely. So I got into SEO in like 2010.
Okay.
And at this point, Moz was the conference to go to. It was where everybody went. It was, and so I went in 2000. I think 2011 was my first year, and I remember going to the conference and being new. And even though I'd done a lot of prep work, and we can talk about that another time too, but I felt really alone. Even though I kind of knew some people, I'd seen them on Twitter. We shook hands, but I remember just feeling kind of out of it and seeing people go off to their dinners together or their parties. And me just being like, oh man, like what's going on here?
Right.
Well, I was fortunate enough to make friends with a few really cool people at that first MozCon. One of whom is Kane Jameson, who runs Content Harmony. It's a great content brief software.
Friend of the show. Yeah.
Yeah. So he and I'm a really social person. I like to talk to people, and I love talking to smart people, right? So we had the idea. I had the idea, and he helped me execute it. That we would do a pre-party so that everybody, as they flew into MozCon on Sunday or Monday or whatever, would have a place to come and meet people. And so we did it at the Tap House, And it was that year, I can't remember if it was 12 or 13, the first year that we did it, was an amazing thing because there were so many people who were coming up at that time together, and they were all meeting each other in the room, right? So like I met Greg there for the first time, but I also met Nick Eubanks there for the first time, and Jeff Kenyon and a bunch of other people. It became a mutual appreciation society, right? Like everybody's in this room looking at each other like, oh my gosh, you're so smart. And they'd be like, no, you're so smart. No. And it became a tradition. And so, for the next 3-4 years, every year we would do an unofficial party the night before. And it was a really, really great thing. I've actually been, since quarantine, I've been reflecting on that period of my life. And I'm so grateful that I got to spend that time with everybody and to meet all of these incredible, intelligent, passionate people who now have scattered, right? Like Moz doesn't have the influence that it had then, but I like to think that those bonds will never be broken.
I love that. Well, he has one more question, and then I left this out, but he also said there are many other no context questions he has for you, but they are not appropriate for on air. And so I'm only sticking with what is like. This is a PG-13-ish show, so I guess that's about it. He has one more, which is that you may have kidnapped Roger Mosbot. Does this sound familiar to you at all?
Yeah. So again, this is a MozCon story, and basically there are these plushy Roger robots, and everybody got one. And so, Greg, who loves all of the swag, had like put his aside because he's going to give it to his kid. And I thought it would be really funny to just put it underneath the table. And he spent like the better part of a day, like tweeting at Moz and like running around trying to like get another plushie. Only to find, like with 10 minutes left in the day that I was like, oh, here you go, buddy. Here's your plushie. And what's funny is I actually ended up with an extra one of those. I don't know how, but I have 2 plushie Roger Mosbots. One other thing before you go off here, I want to tell a Greg Gifford story.
Please.
So in 2013, I was like I said, we'd done this, and Dana DiTomaso had just finished speaking, and she invited me to go out to dinner with her and a few friends. And one of those friends was Greg Gifford. He and I had never met. We'd sort of talked to each other, and we were just walking down the street, talking. He was really interested in what I was doing, and building Altura, and we were just jamming out, talking about this stuff. And he said, hey, what about speaking? Is that something that you've done before? And I was like, no, but I really want to. I'm supposed to speak at Search Fest, which is a festival in Portland. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, you don't have to wait for that. That's like next year. State of Search is in November. Do you want to just come speak at that? Wow. And I was like, yeah. And so Greg Gifford gave me my first chance at speaking at an SEO conference, and that led to Search Fest, which led to speaking at MozCon, which led to speaking at Content Marketing World, which led to a ton of other opportunities in my career. So I just want to express my gratitude to Greg for always reaching out to new people and giving people a chance, which I think is, especially where we are as a culture, where we're trying to make sure that everybody is included here. I just want to point out that Greg, yes, I'm a middle-aged white man, but I'm not the only person he gave opportunities to. And I'm very appreciative of everything that he has done. You're very lucky to have him, Mark.
I couldn't agree more. So I will pass that message along. And this is one of the nicest wrap-ups to the show we've ever had. So, Zeph, I'm gonna give you a virtual cheers for now, and thank you for coming on. You really you broaden my horizons for what we can do with SEO and what sorts of challenges we can take on. So thanks for coming on, and I'm looking forward to seeing you maybe at a conference in the near future.
It was my pleasure, Mark. I really appreciate it, and thanks again. Take care.
All right, take care.